in that game, but they go into the next week, shuffled the whole offensive line. So they went through 15 practices and then half of a game again, a bye game against Miami of Ohio. We don't have a left tackle. And yes, did the injury to Kevin Haywood cause that? Yes, but downstream of it, what is the issue? Complete inability to evaluate what they had at tackle and how to adapt to it. And they then spent a good portion of the season trying to figure out who to play at left tackle. And they ended up moving the right tackle to left tackle, took the right guard, moved him to right tackle. Redshirt freshman Emerson Mandel wasn't very good at it, but he did it. And the guy that they thought in Davis Heitzen was going to be their starting left tackle by the end of the year was the third string center because he was kind of functional. He could snap the ball because that was the other issue they had. They had their third string redshirt freshman center couldn't snap the ball. He just wasn't there yet. I mean, he was getting blown up, and that's fine. He's supposed to marinate anyways. He wasn't really supposed to play. When you're down to third stringers, I don't, unless you're, just pulling in blue chips at a rate that the Badgers don't, that's not sustainable. And even for a team that pulls in blue chippers, I think third string centers are asking a lot. Third string anything on an offensive line. So I guess to me, that was very symbolic of the issues they had, which was, yes, you had injury luck, you had bad injury luck, but you had no sort of cohesive plan behind it. I mean, you could do the same thing at quarterback. You had an offense built around 2 years ago, Tanner Mordecai, athletic guy, not a quarterback who runs the ball, but is very athletic guy. He's low key. This is one of hills I'll die on. One of my favorite Badger quarterbacks I've seen, just because he was a dude. And if you watch the Badgers, that team was such a mess, and he was fun. But then he goes down. You have Braden Locke behind him, who's not an FBS level quarterback, just a misevaluation, and not really clear why that happened. You jump to last year. You had Tyler Van Dyke come in, who it was odd. They wanted him to be a guy who was going to be, pull the ball twice on a zone read a game, which is not who he was. Just he was not a mobile guy, but they wanted him to be something that he wasn't. He gets hurt. It's more Braden Locke, who by that time it was we don't need to see any more Braden Locke. We described it as the look, which was, you could tell that guy was on the field going, why do they still have me on the field? He knew he was out of his depth, and he has bounced around as a backup. He wants to coach.
Great then they had the Phil Longo experiment too at that time too. That didn't really pan out.
Which the other part, I mean, there's other pieces to it. If you're, again, it's a good way to sort of get off me talking about quarterbacks for 45 minutes, but the Longo Fickell thing has nothing to do with offensive philosophy. People have this thing, well, Wisconsin has to do this. There's no reason Wisconsin has to run, 12 personnel and march out full. There isn't. There's no argument for it, except they did it for a long time. And even Paul Christ at the end, they spent 2/3 of their snaps in 11%. That idea that's what they kept doing until the end is not real. It's great mythology. It's not real in practice. If you go look at film. But the Longo thing was, Fickell has come around and sort of more or less his mea culpa has been, I don't know a lot of coaches. I spent most of my career at Ohio State, and then I went to Cincinnati, found a few guys there, and most of the guys that I had at Cincinnati are now in South Bend, and I don't have a great coaching network. And Phil Longo was a guy he never worked with. It was, I met him at coaching clinics, and we had similar philosophies, whatever that meant. He brought him in. He brought in his offensive line coach, Jack McNeil, in that first season. They paid Jack McNeil not to work for a year. I mean, they fired him after the first year on a 2-year deal. It was just not working. And he was out of the building 2/3 of the way through the season. It was a very strange situation that, when it was the first one of those things, you go, well, you get the benefit of the doubt now. But then you start losing that benefit of the doubt, and they become red flags instead of, well, the coach has got to, do what he wants. But you bring in an offensive coordinator to run your offense, and then you fire his offensive line coach after a year. It doesn't look great. Jeff Grimes is a guy that he doesn't have a background with either. But he just knew he needed a change. And Phil Longo was ready to get out of town. He was ready to, I think he probably packed his bags for him to help him. And we'll see what happens. I mean, the offense this past year, the discussion we had was you were looking at the quarterbacks they had on the roster, and there wasn't a consistent set of skills. Like, I don't quite get what they're going for. And you don't know how much of that is what's the best thing available in the transfer portal, because it's 3 years of transfer quarterbacks until you got to the fourth string true freshman in Carter Smith this past year, who, okay, I mean, I truly, like we said, I'm not going to judge. It's a baby deer. That's our line as always. Like when it's the young quarterback before their time, it's like the baby deer with the wobbly knees and the headlights. He's just going to be in panic mode the whole time. And I mean, I think one game he was, someone will again correct me in the comments, who's one of our listeners if they come over, but I think he was 3 for 12 for 16 yards or something like that. I mean, I could look it up against Illinois. I mean, they're comical. And as I said to one of my friends, it's like, no, he's the quarterback who doesn't throw, and he's the better option at quarterback right now. Because they had a fourth string guy who was a freebie guy from Southern Illinois, and Hunter Simmons, who for some reason went to the pro day the other day, but that's a discussion for another time, who just was out of his depth. He was supposed to be there just to be a scout team body, and was, and it's no shade on him. He was just pushed into a role he wasn't supposed to be in. But you looked at this team, and throughout the year, it always felt like they were putting out a fire or reacting to the whatever last bad thing happened. They were just compensating for that in how they did things. And I still feel like that's a lot of what Fickell is doing. A lot of some of it's not all him. A big part of, I think, where the Badgers are struggling is the way college football has changed basically in his tenure. I mean, just in terms of the way NIL has changed football, the way roster management has changed. The Wisconsin athletic department is not at all comfortable and still trying to figure out sort of the NIL world. I know when they first started the Varsity Collective, which was their NIL vehicle, they advertised it as like, we're going to bring in alumni from Fortune 500 companies to give talks to our teams to talk about what they could do after graduation if they don't want to play football. You know, like their vision for what it was not anywhere near where it ended up. And there's a lot of talk in the last year that they were underspending on NIL in terms of where their peers were. They were in the bottom third, supposedly, of the Big Ten. And one of the deeper pocketed alums has made a fairly public tour of radio shows and things like that, claiming there was a big investment. I think maybe there is, but it's, again, still this university trying to figure out where it wants to be in that world, because they always, in the old days, we are in video, so I don't have to say.
Air quotes, yeah.
On our show, I always have to say, you can't see me right now, but I'm doing air quotes. Yeah. But back in the old days, again, air quotes, they looked at it like Wisconsin did more with less, and they kind of liked that ethos about who they were and how they operated, and it made people comfortable. And now that value proposition has to be redefined in a different way. Like, you can't be more with less anymore.
Exactly, because I guess the way that you sell Wisconsin to a prospect 10 years ago is, hey, you talk about Barry Alvarez, you talk about the tradition, you talk about Camp Randall, you talk about, just the community. Whereas, fast forward to now, the way that you're selling Wisconsin now is more about talking about the Big Ten, talking about the opportunity, and just kind of, bringing that all together more or less. So it's fascinating you hearing about that too, because, I'm also a Pitt fan too, and I feel like I'm kind of going through that same thing in the ACC, whereas, Pitt and Wisconsin, they kind of have that similarity where it's, hey, kind of a blue collar type of community, that type of thing.
Yeah, it's a development. The idea is you're going to come in, we're going to play you by your third year. if you're the coach, it's like, you're going to come in, we're going to throw you in the weight room and let you marinate for a few years. And then you can turn into Zach Bond or TJ Watt or, you name it. I mean, they had a string of outside line, Andrew Van Ginkel. I mean, these are guys, like, if you watch Sunday football, they're all Badgers. I mean, half the Steeler defense is Badgers. Nick Herbig and TJ Watt are the ends, and Keanu Benton is the nose, there. So it's like, you have all these Badgers out there, and they had an ability to, and that's where they're missing now, because that has fallen off. They are simply not producing the NFL talent that they were. I mean, they were putting guys in the draft that aren't happening now. And I think that was a big part of their sell that is now lacking. Put even aside the economics of NIL, the Wisconsin offensive lineman archetype has, well, I mean, I could even go into a whole thing. The Wisconsin offensive line hasn't been the Wisconsin offensive line for the better part of a decade.
Yeah.
But they had bodies they put out there. They'll put, Riley Mahlman, maybe a day 2 pick. Maybe somebody else gets scooped up. You don't know. But it's not where it was. But it's, again, they have to, is it that they're not identifying guys? I think they're, for Fickell, if you're being fair to Luke Fickell, I do think late stage Paul Chryst had issues that I don't know that they'd necessarily be in a different place. I think the athletic director, Chris McIntosh, made the calculation that I recognize that football is changing in NIL, and Paul Chryst was pretty obviously not interested in dealing with that. I mean, he was asked a couple questions, and he always was kind of rambly and marble-mouthy in how he answered questions, but he gave a big 2,000-word statement of nothing about, like, it was just clearly something that he was not thinking about, wasn't engaged in, didn't want a part of.
Exactly.
And even somebody like Fickell does not come out and say it, but you do get the sense that he isn't as enamored with college football in 2026 as he was with college football in 2022. And I don't think it's just because of the wins and losses that he's producing on the field. I think the skills and the duties of the job as a high-level football coach are not exactly in line with where they used to be for him and where he felt his strengths were. But it continues to be part of the struggle for a team like Wisconsin to figure out sort of how they do it.
That's what I mean, because now you're a head coach, you're a salesperson, you're a fundraiser, you're also convincing kids to go into the portal, go out of the portal. So it's really, you're really just wearing a lot of hats with the job in general, which I guess is a good segue into their recruiting class, because as I kind of looked at their recruiting class before we talked and everything, ranked 66th per On3 Sports this year, which is a pretty big drop compared to 27th for last year. But the good news is that they have some good solid kids here. They have about 15 commits to 33 transfers, so they're bringing in some new bodies. Obviously, the headliner is Colton Joseph from Old Dominion, who I know we talked about Tanner Mordecai a couple moments ago. I actually see some similarities between those two in terms of kind of their athletic build and whatnot. But when you look at this recruiting class, you kind of look at kind of the headliner transfer portal guys. I guess my question to you is, one, who are a couple guys that Wisconsin fans should be on the lookout for? And I guess secondarily, how to some of these more headliner guys build into what Wisconsin's identity could or should be going into this year? Because I feel like that's something when I think about this Wisconsin team that I feel like is somewhat missing now.
Yeah, so there's a couple pieces to it. One, and this ties into sort of like Fickell turning the dials a little bit. He's made a big deal that there was only, like you said, the class was in the 60s, but I think the significant part of it was there's only 15 guys in it. And his sell on that, for lack of a better term, is they don't call them recruits anymore. And I feel as cringy about it as it sounds. He says they are now draft picks. They refer to them as draft picks. And what he means by that is the phrase is they play grown-ass football in a grown-ass league. And that's sort of his talk about the Big Ten now. And, there's 18 teams and you're going to play 6 or 7 ranked teams in your conference schedule alone and blah, 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 blah. So the way they are approaching their roster now is they need guys who can play right away. If they're bringing a guy in as a freshman, they are expecting a contribution in some way. That probably means special teams, that kind of thing. Or maybe, you're the third down, you're not a third down back. They're not going to use him in pass pro, but you're third back in the rotation. The only exception to that is offensive linemen. They're still expecting them to sit and marinate for a couple of years just to put on the muscle. But the way he's selling it is the guys that are in that recruiting class of the, 15 of them, we should see 10 of them playing. I wouldn't call them a lot of snaps, but significant enough snaps that if you watch Badger football, you're like, hey, who's number 20 set? I don't recognize that. Who is that? Who's that guy on, punt coverage, or who's the gunner, or, that kind of thing. But so we'll see what happens there. I don't know if that's selling a 15-person class or if he really believes it. I kind of think it's a little bit of both. But on the portal class, Colton Joseph is interesting to me. I will be honest, you gave me pause when you did compare him to Tanner Mordecai, because I hadn't thought about that. He's a funny guy. We did I watched every snap of Old Dominion offense for an episode, just because I was curious, because I watched Van Dyke, every transfer quarterback they brought in, and I was like, oh, let me see what they look like try to figure out what they liked about them. And the one that made the most sense to me, honestly, was Billy Edwards last year, who we didn't mention before, but another guy that got hurt and then sort of spent the whole year injured. And then Fickell kind of intimated that he was that's a whole different story. But I understood how he fit. He was a guy who was a quarterback with some mobility, seemed like, not a superstar arm, but he had an arm, but also had enough mobility to get out of trouble. And he was on a truly atrocious Maryland team that had legitimately the worst offensive line.
The offensive line was rough there.
I've never seen it. I watched it. I had PTSD. We did an episode on him 2 years ago. I spent the first 25 minutes talking about how bad the offensive line was because I couldn't get it out of my mind. But Joseph is interesting to me because that offense was so different than what I think Wisconsin's going to do. They were as I said in our episode, it's if the field is 53.5 yards wide, they used 52 3/4 of the yards with bodies. And a lot of what he did was, a zone read with maybe an RPO element, and it was huck it. And he has a big arm. He gets me a little, I'm very curious how we're going to work with his accuracy, because he didn't have great accuracy. He airmailed some balls, and when they had a more traditional route structure with a progression, that was not where he was strong, which again, that doesn't mean he won't work. It just means what little bit I've seen of Jeff Grimes, which again, there's a lot of asterisks just because of all of the crap that was going on.
Exactly.
Fourth string running backs, fourth string quarterbacks, an offensive line that was a disaster. He tried to do different things every week, so you don't really know what. You can look at the old BYU tape and get an idea, or the Kansas tape and get an idea, but it'll be interesting to see. I know they're going to want to use his legs. They got to use his legs in a way that doesn't get him hurt, but maybe Luke Fickell in his heart of hearts just believes he's due for a non-injury season at quarterback. And it works out. But I'll be honest with you, outside of him and a couple of the Arkansas linemen that are brought in, who I think you can kind of figure have an inside track to start. They got a starting center who's a grad transfer. Yeah. They got a guy who is kind of like Kevin Haywood, played as a true freshman, played a lot of special teams, who you got to think Eric Mateos, who's the offensive line coach, is saying that guy is I'm bringing him with me because I know he can play. The rest of it is dudes competing. I mean, I think the obvious one is Sama coming from Iowa State. Like, he's a running back who's a little bit more in the traditional mold, and they want somebody who can run the ball. And he's going to pair with Darian Dupree, who's a little bit more of a sideline to sideline, almost like an Oregon style running back, where you can line them up in lots of different places. So what I'm really honestly curious about is they haven't been very clear about who they are expecting a lot out of. The only other one really that you're like, okay, they're going to start is Marvin Burks at safety, I would argue. I mean, he was a starter at Mizzou. There's no reason to transfer unless you're going to start. And so you're going to have a rotation on the line. I mean, the offensive line, they did on the offensive line basically what they did on the defensive line last year, which was their defensive line 2 years ago just got blown off the ball, and it was a real weakness for them. So again, in Fickell fashion, it's react really strongly to what happened to you there. And they brought in, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but I think it's 6 defensive linemen. It's more than 5. We'll leave it at that. And between that and the bodies they retained, they figured out a rotation and had a sound front 7. Like, it wasn't great. Their edge rushers weren't superstars. I mean, Rieger was good. He might get drafted, but like, they figured something out there. And I feel like last year, Luke Fickell's lesson was, oh my gosh, he even said it, like, I don't have depth on the offensive line. Like, his real lesson feels like I need a better 4th string center, which I know sounds a little insane, but they brought in a ton of offensive linemen this year. So maybe that sorts out of his offensive line. And if they can sort out their offensive line, I've said this for 3 years, if they can sort out their offensive line, a lot of the other stuff just sorts itself out. I mean,